Hello, this is Danielle Stewart, and I'm going to tell you today about how to use Google Translate and templates for translation for Russellville School District. Before we get started, we need to become familiar with the Arkansas Translation Law. Because Arkansas is not a bilingual state, Arkansas has a rule below. The basic language of instruction in all public school branches shall be in English only, and any person violating the provisions of this shall be guilty of a violation and be fined not to exceed $25. This violation shall be considered a separate offense. So, because we're not in a bilingual state, we have to follow this law. So all of our instruction, our assessments, our activities should be in the English language. So what does that mean for us when we get translations done? Any translations that go through the ESL office must be parent communication. However, you can translate your own documents, but it must be supplemental for students. And I underline the word supplemental for students because you have to provide the translation in addition to their already curriculum. For example, if you give them a textbook that's in English, you may provide a Spanish language textbook as a supplemental resource, but it cannot be their only resource for learning the instruction. And then any parent communication may be translated. So how do you schedule a translator at Russellville School District? Number one, you want to email Marcela Estrada for Spanish language translations. I would plan ahead and allow at least 3 to 5 days for turnaround. Sometimes it takes us a little while to find someone to translate it if Marcela is fully booked. Please ask Marcela for available times and then schedule a meeting with parents. Make sure that she's available first before you schedule the meeting. If she can help facilitate that conversation, she'll be willing to. She can make the call to see when they're available. Number 4, if there's a conflict with her schedule, please try everything you can to reschedule when she can attend. She's our first resource because she's our district Spanish language translator. All translations that go through the ESL office must be parent contact only. We are not allowed by law to translate student work, test answers, etc. If you need translations in another language like Arabic or Chinese, please contact Toby Radnauer. She's the ESL office secretary. So those are for formal communications. There are some options for using Google Translate for informal communication. For example, if you want to send a quick note home to a student or to a parent, or if you do want to use a translated test or assessment as part of a supplemental, as in you're giving it in addition to the English test, that's okay. But remember, all of the answers should come back to you, the responses in English. So this is how you find Google Translate on a computer. Today we're going to talk about 3 different options. 1, Google Translate on the computer. Number 2, Google Translate app for the iPhone. And number 3, the templates that we have available. So in order to access Google Translate, you can go to that site below, translate.google.com, or you can go to Google and just type in Google Translate. So what does it look like when you type it in? When it comes up, you'll see a screen much like you do here. You have to type in your message, and usually it will detect the language that you type it in. So if you type it in English, it'll say English detected. And I have written, I need to have a meeting with you about your child. To choose the language, you simply, where the red arrow points, choose the language. You can pick Spanish, and I have Arabic chosen as second on my profile just simply because Spanish and Arabic are our 2 biggest languages that's spoken at Russellville. You can use the speaker button to have it read verbally to a student or out loud. Maybe you're giving instructions to a class and you have a ESL class or maybe a large population in your class, or maybe even an individual student that you need to bring up to your desk and you can push the speaker button. I'm going to get into in a little bit why the speaker button is important. So how do I know what I write in Google Translate has been translated correctly? Because we know that sometimes we can type it in and it'll come back and it'll sound a little funny or weird. So what you do is once you type it in English, like we did on the previous screen, you use the reverse language button to invert the language. So the one with the two arrows where the red arrow is pointing to, if you do that, it'll switch the languages. And then you will see that it says, I need to have a meeting with you about your child. So we know that that's translated it correctly. This allows you to make sure it's translated appropriately so that the English doesn't sound weird. So what about students that do not read in their native language? Because remember, we have many of our ESL students and some of our mainstream students who speak Spanish do not read and write in their first language. Some were too young to have learned it. Some are currently too young to be literate in that language. Maybe they're just now learning the alphabet in English. And some were only taught how to speak it and not read and write it from their parents, or maybe even their grandparents. So if you have a Spanish-speaking student in your class, it's not always right to assume that they can read a translated text if you give it to them. You want to make sure that they can first. So there's a speaker option for illiterate students. In order to communicate with your student that doesn't read or write, you can use the speaker option. So if you give me a second, I'm going to go to this website that I have pulled up. It's Google Translate. And I have this pulled up, the same thing that I had in Spanish. I need to have a meeting, with you about your child. So you can see that I have chosen Arabic because for Spanish, sometimes we can sound out the words and say them. But for Arabic, it's much different. So if you have a student who doesn't read and write in Arabic, say a kindergartner that hasn't been taught that, and you need to ask them a question, this is how you would get them to listen to it. I'm going to push this button where it says listen. And then you will look at the child. Try to have phrases. I'm going to erase this so I can show you a different option. So have you eaten lunch? I have used this before with a kindergartner because I try to keep your responses when you do verbal with the younger ones as to yes or no questions so they can shake their head, because if they respond in Arabic, you won't know what they are saying. So if you can keep it yes or no, so this is what it would sound like. And then they can respond yes or no. So you can get some basic information from your students if you need to get some classroom procedures and things like that across. So I'm returning to our presentation here, just one second. Okay, so then now we're going to talk about Google Translate for iPhone. This is the icon that you'll see for the app. It has a G. Sometimes I've seen it with an A there instead of a G, but it's the same app. And this is how it looks like compared to the computer version. It's still Google Translate, but it's just on your phone. You can type in whatever you want. It has several different languages. It's got the reverse button. It's got the speaker option. The great thing about the phone app, for one difference that you can use, is instead of having to type it all, you can use the microphone and speak into it, and then it will translate it. And you can still use the microphone on the other side to read it in that language. But in other words, you don't have to type it all. You can just voice dictate it. This is one of the coolest options on the app, is that there is a camera button on the Google Translate app that you can push and then hold up to a screen in another language. You see how they're using it to look at the signs in the town or announcements, and when you hold it over it, it can translate it from Spanish to English or English to Russian or Spanish, Arabic, all of those different options, and it will actually instantly translate it just by hovering over whatever the text is. So to access this feature, you push on this awesome button I put. It's a little camera button on the Google Translate app. When you click on the camera button, a screen will come up, and the picture to the left is actually me with my phone, and I am hovering over a Journeys textbook, and you see that the Journeys textbook in the background is in English, but when I hover over it, it instantly translates it into Spanish. This is a really great option if you need a really quick translation. It's also great to have on your phone for parent-teacher conferences, so that if you have phones that papers that haven't been translated, you can hover over it so the parent can see what it says. RSD has also been working on several translation templates. These translation templates include field trip permission slip template, a meeting time request template, registration form, a teacher brag note, classroom teacher newsletter, useful written phrases for teacher feedback, and useful written phrases for parent communication. The two that are useful written phrases, those are actually phrases that are in both languages that you can use to write on postcards or notes home. They're more for personalization of the communication. If I'm giving this PD, I will give you a paper copy. However, to access the digital copy of these documents, you can click here, and I will attach this presentation to the screencast also. If you want to type on the digital copies, you just need to go to File and then Make a Copy in Google Docs, and then you can type on whatever you want, because the link I have shared is just a view-only copy, so you need to make sure and do the File Make a Copy before you start typing. If you have any other questions about translations or interpretations, booking a conference, etc., remember that my email is danielle.stewart@russellvilleschools.net, or you can email marcella.estrada@russellvilleschools.net. Thank you.